Now, campaigners are calling for sexual harassment in public spaces to be made illegal in Scotland. According to a recent UN report, 97% of women aged 18 to 24 say they've experienced sexual harassment. The call follows last year's independent report by Baroness Helena Kennedy, which recommended public harassment be made a criminal offence here. We'll speak to one group leading the campaign in a moment, but first let's hear from Miss M, who won her rape case in the civil courts and became one of the first women to do so in Scotland. So what does she make of the proposed changes?
I'm Miss M and I was raped in 2013 and pursued a civil case after the criminal justice system let me down in Scotland. Through my experiences and my cases and the people I've come across along the way when fighting for my own justice, I've witnessed misogynistic behaviour towards the cases I was taking or the beliefs that I had as I went through to try and ultimately get closure for what happened to me. I now feel strongly that Scotland's legal system should be able to measure misogyny in an attempt to identify where additional training or support for victims is required. Misogyny is so deeply embedded in our culture. Unfortunately, many men still harbour deeply ingrained misogynistic attitudes and have a deep sense of entitlement with regard to women and their bodies. In the same society, women and girls have been expected to self-protect. From an early age, it becomes the norm for girls to expect dangerous men in society and to protect themselves. An internalised message that it will be their fault if something happens to them. This is the message that I received from those around me, from people against me taking a civil case against the man that raped me. I drank too much. It was what I wore that ultimately impacted the fact I got raped. That I was delayed reporting and therefore making it up. But also, these are rape myths, but the behaviour that I saw and witnessed, the things that are written online, men with misogynistic values, made me think that I was doing something wrong and that actually I shouldn't be standing up for myself and what happened to me. I think Scotland needs a law which acknowledges the misogyny in the offence, such as misogynistic harassment recommended in the review by Baroness Helena Kennedy. Women should know that there is a law that is clearly there for them for when they experience misogynistic behaviour. I'm concerned with the boys who are weaponising sexually violent language, the same boys who grow into men and have partners or wives. Threatening or invoking rape has become a commonplace and something that I experienced throughout taking a civil rape case, a landmark case of its kind in 2018. Many discussions have also been had around the consequences of misogynistic behaviour. I'm a strong believer that we need criminal law to protect women and act as a deterrent. We also need education and legal to go hand in hand. Statistics can be used in identifying where further educational support is required. A specific misogyny law will not be a silver bullet in the criminal justice system, but it will show to Scotland's victims of gender-based violence that things are changing and to perpetrators that their time is up. So the man who raped me throughout the criminal trial and the civil case, phone evidence was presented when the defendant's phone was downloaded, and it was very clear between messages and between himself and another witness that the types of comments that they were, either discussing me or other women, for me to see these comments that he had said after the night that he'd raped me was, for me, I would never sort of forget. And to see this misogynistic behaviour and language being used just as throwaway comments, but really makes you question, has this misogynistic views and the language that they're using with friends then led to sort of not seeing women as, equal to themselves and something that they can just control, have whenever they want, and the power that they can sort of exert over us. So, yeah, I'm a very strong believer that Scotland needs to have clear laws to protect women and really start to sort of highlight the problems that we have and the support that's available. Following my criminal trial and towards the lead up of my civil rape case, I experienced firsthand the extent that people would go and the things that members of the public that were against what I was doing would do. At points, my legal team had to get involved. This is one of the reasons I have an anonymity and people only know me as Miss M. It's because of the misogynistic behaviour of other people, that actually I shouldn't be doing this, that I shouldn't have the right to fight for closure and justice for my family. I was put in fear of other people throughout the lead up to the civil case, whether it was from a witness in my case that was intimidating my friends and I that were witnesses, or whether it was just views of people online discussing something that was widely reported in the news. For me, it put me in fear, the comments online, the rape myths and misogynistic behaviour that people were presenting. They didn't know who I was, but I could still see these comments. And whether it was threats towards me or that I shouldn't have the right to do this, it did put me in fear. And I think it should be clearer for people I now support. We shouldn't have to put up and face this behaviour. We should have the right to be valued equally among other people in society. And I think that a law that focuses on misogynistic harassment will ultimately support women, show them that it's not right, that Scotland is going to change, we are going to do something to support you, that there is a law now in place and you should come forward and speak up. Because the more we speak up, the more we support each other and come together collectively is the way that we show to these perpetrators and to the people that are misogynistic that it isn't right and we're not going to stand for it anymore.
That's Miss M speaking there. She won a rape case in the civil courts and became one of the first women to do so in Scotland. Well, let's speak to Alice Jackson. She's co-founder of StrutSafe. It's an Edinburgh-based organisation set up in the wake of the murder of Sarah Everard to improve women's safety. Alice, thanks for coming on with us this morning.
Yeah, good morning, Fiona. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, pleasure. I think you were listening across to that. What do you make of what Miss M was saying?
I was. I think she is such a powerful speaker, first of all, and I think that everything that she discussed was so true, and so much of it I truly agree with. And I think, especially coming from her, someone who has, fought so hard for justice and fought so hard for everything that she went through to be acknowledged and to be properly responded to. It's great to hear from her, and I think that what she was saying about demonstrating to victims and people who face violence and harassment that there needs to be a demonstration that that these issues are taken seriously and that their welfare is considered, and also a signal to perpetrators as well of any kind of sexual violence and harassment, that this is not something that anybody is prepared to stand for, and we're all going to come together to create real reform and a real change.
Well, talk to me about that, Alice. Tell us about the campaign that you've started and why you've started it.
Mm-hmm. So I've co-founded a campaign called Make Public Sexual Harassment Illegal. And this is something that, the area that I work in, which is anti-violence, and StrutSafe runs a service for people to call on their way home, whether they're, walking or however they're getting home. And for people who feel unsafe, they can call and speak to a volunteer and receive support. And one of the criticisms that we receive very regularly, and that I actually, definitely agree with, which I think always surprises people, is that, well, what is this doing about the wider problem? Are you putting the onus on people to protect themselves more than actually trying to create systemic societal change and dismantle so many of these misogynistic attitudes that actually lead to harassment and violence? And so for a long time, we've been wanting to do that work as well. And public sexual harassment is not illegal in Scotland. There is no, contrary to popular belief, actually, and there is no, legal basis for someone to report something that's happened to them, for someone to seek justice. And so we wanted to do something about that. We wanted to, petition the Scottish government to take this issue seriously. And the misogyny report, obviously, that we've all been speaking about, that was one of the official recommendations in that report, was that this be dealt with and that public sexual harassment be made a criminal offence. And so that is what we're pushing for. So
how would this work in practice, Alice? How would you see the legislation working?
So something that actually Ms. M was talking about, and something that we think is the highest priority, is that this be an education-based approach and an education-based response to this kind of behaviour. I don't think that putting someone in prison or giving someone a fine, which is what is being introduced in England and Wales, is the proper way to help people understand the problem and to tackle the problem. A penal approach, I believe, is not something that's going to get us very far. So we are pursuing an education-based approach, i.e. that if someone were to commit this kind of offence, the same way that if you speed or if you're underage and you're caught with a small amount of drugs, you go on a course. And you take a course, and during that sort of period, the dangers of dangerous driving are thoroughly explored, and the dangers of reckless or drunk driving are explored. And then you are able to return back into society with an idea of why what you did causes so much harm and can really platform and cause violence. So that is what we're pursuing legislatively.
And the Scottish Government says it will consult on specific draft laws by this summer. Do you think there's enough urgency on this from the Scottish Government?
I think that all the responses that we've had from the Scottish Government and MSPs that we've spoken to have been incredibly positive. And so it's not that we have, I believe, pushback on something like this. But as you mentioned, the key thing is urgency, and the key thing is saying, well, I appreciate that you want to do something about this, just as we do. And we would like, realistic timelines. We would like we're going to, keep up with the consistent pressure to achieve what we want to achieve. Saying that you would support this is all very well, but we want to see action that actually leads to this legislative change.
Alice, you mentioned the education there, and I know there have been concerns about young men in particular idolising figures like Andrew Tate, himself as a self-declared misogynist online. It's interesting, the EIS union, the teaching union, put out a tweet this week. The EIS is aware many teachers will be looking for resources on how to discuss Andrew Tate in their classrooms and to foster greater resilience against harmful online extremist misogyny. I guess that's what you're talking about, isn't it? How much is this about educating young people, perhaps before offences are committed?
So it is entirely about education, and educating young people, as you said, is a significant part of that. We have a real pastoral responsibility to ensure that, young men aren't being radicalised online as they are with Andrew Tate. We can't, to demonise these young men is not helpful. It doesn't, send them down a path where they understand that behaviour. It can increasingly push them to more extreme behaviour. And I actually saw, what the teaching union put out, and was so excited to see that, they're taking this issue as seriously, and that they're also teachers are getting support, because I know many teachers have been dealing with this. I actually have a friend who's a teacher, and she's been experiencing this issue. And so that there's going to be proper support for them. But this is the thing, educating all people at a young age, all young men and women, about how important it is to treat people with respect is imperative. But then for people, we also have to remember that people who enact misogynistic behaviour, all of this is learned and socialised. So they will be receiving this from friendship groups, they'll be receiving this from family members, they'll be receiving this from, any social interactions they're having. And so there are so many men out in the world who never received, and who wouldn't receive with just an education-based approach in schools, that kind of education and those kind of conversations that help them understand why this behaviour is harmful. And I think so many people would say, I would never behave in an extreme sexual violent way to a woman. Miss Anne was talking about how following her assault, and following the court case, she could see what her attacker, her rapist, had been discussing with friends, sexist jokes, sexist comments. And so many people will say, well, yeah, but it would never go beyond that. I would never do anything more. I would never, rape somebody, or I would never grope somebody. These are all just jokes. And what's really important to remember is that we know that this kind of behaviour endorses more extreme behaviour. There's this pyramid, and it's called the pyramid of rape culture, which sounds very extreme, but it's an academic tool, and it's used to show how small behaviours, low level, as they might be considered, behaviours like, rape jokes or sexist banter among colleagues, all it does is platform increasingly extreme behaviour. And we know that a rapist isn't just born, they're made. We know that, you mentioned, obviously, that we were founded following the murder of Sarah Everard, and her attacker and murderer, Wayne Couzens, he didn't start at that level. He started as someone who was consuming illegal pornography. And he started as someone who was making sexist jokes to colleagues. He started as someone who was dating underage girls. And then he started moving up this pyramid and he started exposing himself in public. And then you move up that pyramid. And not everybody is going to move up that pyramid, but so many people will. And if we stop this behavior at a low level, if we de-radicalize young men at a young level, then people aren't going to see someone making a sexist comment and think, well, this is enabling me to increasingly enact increasingly extreme behavior and move up that pyramid. So actually tackling something that might seem a joke, low level, not really that serious, that is going to do so much work to dismantle the more extreme offences.
And Alice, you and I spoke when you set Strut Safe up in the wake of the Sarah Everard murder, and you've been to vigils. What do you think has changed since then?
We did. I remember speaking with you then, and it was so great to sort of have those conversations with you then. And it's almost nice to be to be talking with you again further down the line. And I think that almost the fact that we're talking again down the line signifies that these conversations are still being had. I think that we have for so long, these conversations are only being had when something really, really terrible happens. And then the news about someone being murdered is a flash in the pan, and all these promises are made, and then they never really go anywhere because the issue is forgotten about. We know that a woman is murdered by a man in the UK every 3 days. I think that if that was reversed, it would be considered, a national emergency. But the fact is that we have normalised so much of this behaviour so much. But I do think that the change that I'm pushing for, and the change that so many people are pushing for legislative progress, for educational progress, all this has just been brought in by the teaching union in terms of a new approach to tackling, misogyny amongst young men in schools. This is the kind of thing. And more often than not, it's people like teachers, like campaigners who end up achieving this, than governments who promise things that then never get done. So I'm really glad that we're still having these conversations, and I'm really glad that we can actually almost visibly see progress that is being pushed for and achieved. But there is so much further to go. But I hope we'll be talking again further down the line.
We absolutely will, Alice. We'll keep the conversation going. And as always, thank you so much for your time. It's much appreciated. Alice Jackson there, co-founder of Strut Safe. Well, we did speak to the Scottish Government about their plans. They gave us this statement read by one of our producers.
To tackle sexual harassment, we must tackle the underlying attitudes and inequalities and the culture that perpetuates this behaviour. In 2022, Baroness Kennedy's report on misogyny and criminal justice recommended reforms to the criminal law to address misogyny. These included the creation of a new offence of public misogynistic harassment. As set out in the programme for government, the Scottish Government will consult on specific draft laws no later than the summer of this year, with a view to introducing a misogyny and criminal justice bill later in this Parliament.
Right, let's talk energy now.